Today's episode will feature Janice Sutherland, an expert on women aging in the workplace. We'll discuss how mature women executives can take charge and prepare for the next chapter of their careers. We'll also discuss the risks for organizations who don't have a specific strategy to address their aging workforce, and how multi-generational teams contribute to companies achieving their strategic imperatives. Stay tuned. You're listening to Living While Leading with your host, Sharon Ehrlich, where I help women IT executives gain more control over their careers and carve out time to care for themselves and family. Welcome, everyone, to the Living While Leading podcast. Today, I have a very special guest with me, and that's Janice Sutherland. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Sharon.
It's really a great pleasure to have you. I'm just going to read a little bit of your bio. It's so dynamic. I didn't want to try to commit it to memory. So I'm going to read a little bit just so people understand how much of a badass you are. So Janice Sutherland is the CEO and founder of This Woman Can, an award-winning leadership and professional development company with a passion for empowering mature professional leaders, ensuring their careers align with their personal values and professional priorities. Janice also collaborates with organizations to unleash the full potential of their maturing workforce, with a keen focus on multi-generational leadership. Her career journey has transcended continents, and she's etched her name in history as the first female CEO in the telecom sector in her ancestral home of Antigua and Barbuda. Having triumphed over multiple career transitions herself, Janice intimately understands the challenges women face when pursuing their leadership aspirations, especially the unique struggles of those she aptly describes as the triple threat: Black, female, and over 50. Drawing from her rich personal and professional journey, including her remarkable shift from corporate CEO to leadership expert, she adeptly shares strategies that empower individuals to cultivate the confidence, presence, and influence needed to break through leadership barriers and navigate the boardroom with unwavering assurance. Janice is also the author of the international bestseller, This Woman Can, the No BS Guide for Women Who Lead, and the host of the This Woman Can podcast. Her podcast inspires mid-career Black women to embrace their true selves, dream big, and achieve their goals and career ambitions. There's one line in that bio that really stood out to me, and that is that you have a keen focus on the maturing workforce and multi-generational leadership. So let me just start there, if you don't mind. What sparked this interest in you in those particular areas?
I suppose one, because I am one, I fall into the vintage, mature workforce. I am a boomer on the cusp of Gen X, so I'm the last year of the boomer generation. It's no secret if you've been listening to what's happening globally, that the workforce is living longer, which means conversely the workforce is aging. As we mature, retirement age is a mover, which means we're forced to work longer, whether we wanted to or not, that we've got different things. We're living longer. We want more out of life. So we want to be able to afford that. So we're working longer. So I really wanted to focus on that aspect of the workforce, I suppose, because not only that, we get less younger people coming into the workforce because of those shifting demographics. As I've heard before, people have said, if you don't have an age strategy, you don't have a growth strategy in your business. So I work on two fronts, one with the women who are in leadership, and secondly, organizations who want to maximize that maturing workforce.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. I mean, post-pandemic, we've all read about quiet quitting and the challenges that organizations have in hiring talent. But where they don't have a challenge hiring talent is from the vintage workforce, right? Because we are willing and ready to work, but we want people to recognize our value and what we bring to the table. So when we're talking about women specifically, what are some of the challenges that mature, or we like to use the word vintage women experience in the workplace?
There's definitely the age discrimination. And if I compare us to men, men are seen as more, when they age, as seen as distinguished. They're looking like, they've that distinguished air about them. Whereas women probably say, oh, look at her. She's not holding up well because of her age and stuff like that. However, one of the things I was discussing last week was that I'm going from a black woman, person of color perspective. We often have heard that adage of black doesn't crack. So we often look younger than our years. When there's an appearance of youth, for want of a better phrase, there's an expectation that we can do more. But to be honest, we still are facing the rigors of maturity. We're a little bit slower. We've got the wisdom and things like that. We just can't go at the speed or work at the level sometimes productively as we did before. There's limited career advancements because we're seen as being too old to advance. Why do you want a career now? Haven't you had a career? Shouldn't you be happy where you are? There's technological gaps that people often say. But again, I often dispute that because as a generation, we have seen the most technological change ever of a generation. When I think about all the things when I was younger to where we are now, that's immense technological changes. The mentoring and sponsorship opportunities, because again, because you've seen to be of a certain age, you're viewed as not needing that support. And I talked about generally our health and well-being because those are realistic things that we cannot avoid. We may look like Peter Pan, we sit in Peter Pan's cup, but we're still having to face some of the natural aging, menopause, all the things that come with it as a woman in the workplace.
And I would imagine that there is also an intersection point when it comes to age and, of course, gender. And then let's not forget, if you want to layer on being a person of color as well.
Yes,
right?
yes. All those things collide, find ourselves battling on many fronts.
But there's one other thing that I wanted to mention, because you talked about some of the things in terms of slowing down or the perception that women over a certain age cannot handle the intensity of the work. I think there's something also worth mentioning is as women mature, our BS radar is a little bit more heightened. And so the threshold for dealing with nonsense is really going down, which can be very problematic for some organizations, really.
Yeah, and that is very well phrased. My filter has been unfiltered. And as you said, if you're taking the dynamics of a race again, you can be then viewed as the proverbial angry black woman, maybe.
I mentioned it not so that it should be viewed through a lens of something being negative, because what you get is really the unvarnished truth, is what most organizations should really appreciate, that you have someone with years of experience behind them who has seen a lot, who has experienced a lot, and is going to raise their hand and say, hey, folks, I'm not so sure that that's a good decision, right? As opposed to towing the line and being silent, right?
Very true. Buying it. I'm not buying into that. You need to, this is what my experience tells me.
Now, as you know, I am an executive coach, and I focus primarily on working with clients who are very successful women who have made it to the director level or above in information technology, but of course, across all sectors. And one of the topics that comes up very often is about reimagining and taking their career in a different direction. When you think about a typical story that I hear is, I have been grinding for the last 2 decades to get to where I am. Naturally, they have everything that they need. They have great titles, they have some wealth, they have, whatever these possessions are that we all think we need when we make money. And then what happens is they're not necessarily certain that they want to continue to be there. And that usually happens when you get to a certain age. This doesn't happen to a 35-year-old, right? This is happening to a woman who's 50 years plus. What would you say to a woman in that situation who wants to continue to contribute? It's still very ambitious, but wants to have a little bit more control over her career so that she can make an impact in the way that she wants to make an impact.
That is really where my work takes me. As much as I talk about leadership, invariably, the age of the women I work with are 50 and above, and they're exactly at that point. They're still very, very ambitious. still highly ambitious because that's that drive that got them to where they are. But they're no longer enamored with the, I suppose, the extrinsic rewards of leadership. I get them to look at, okay, intrinsically, what do you do? Your values have changed. What are you looking for? The first thing to say is that it's totally possible, because quite often we've told ourselves all the reasons why we can't do it, why we can't make that change, we can't do that. We give ourselves all the excuses, but we haven't looked at, okay, you got to where you are right now. Why not make a plan to get to where you want to get to next? It's the same process, but the positive and the advantage is you already have the experience. You already know, you've already got that experience. You're not the bright-eyed, bushy-tailed 20, 30-year-old that was like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to be doing. You actually have a level of knowledge and experience that you can apply to what you want to do. And this is why I talk about helping executives align with their personal priorities and values, because the values you had in your 30s, 40s, quite often is not the same, and it shouldn't be the same, in my opinion, as you are in your 50s. The glass ceiling shouldn't be the only thing we focus on, because when you've got there, what next? Right. You've broken that glass ceiling. What next? How do you enjoy the fruits of that? How do you benefit from what you've achieved? And I think we need to start focusing when we get to that age. You don't have to stop working. If you're 50, on average, you've probably got another 15 to 20 years of work left in you. Right. It should be something you enjoy doing, because invariably, when we start out in our careers as professional women, we're chasing careers that were probably predefined for us. It may, we think it's the thing we should do in society because I said that's what a successful woman looks like. And we ignore the things that actually make us happy.
You know a little bit of my origin story, and you know that I am one of the first people in my family to get, pursue higher education and to have a lot of credentials, etc. And when I was making my decision about what I was going to study, not only for my undergraduate, but when I did my MBA as well, I still was doing it from a place of, what is the right kind of job for me to take, where there is going to be longevity, where I can work. And it, the notion of doing something because of passion or interest absolutely did not enter my mind even for a second. And so I certainly understand when you say, that you've reached a point and you've had a lot of success. And I'm not trying to diminish it and say that it wasn't enjoyable, but there's a point where you say, well, okay, here I am, 50 years plus, and I have all of this knowledge and all of these experiences. Now, how can I apply that to something that I, never thought was even possible for me, because I was always thinking about, getting a monthly paycheck or, accumulating some sort of wealth or something like that.
And I think it's the right time for us. Quite a few of us at this age have already raised our children. We've had our families. We've had the successful career. Sometimes it's time to do stuff for you. And that's not selfish.
No, it isn't. I agree with you. But let's talk about organizations, because the fact of the matter is that most of us are not self-employed. Most of our clients work for large enterprises or corporations. Mm-hmm. What can organizations do in terms of policies or procedures to better support older women who are in their workforce?
I do a talk called Grey Matters about maximizing maturing workforce. And that really focuses on some of the things you should be looking at to not just retain, but also support that maturing workforce, that demographic at your organization. Again, some of us may be in the sandwich generation. I, for one, I think both of us on a personal level, I certainly had aging parents. So there was trying to have that flexibility to both support and have a career. Having the flexible work arrangements can sometimes help. Telecommuting, I know there's a backlash about people returning to the office, but actually I found myself far more productive working from home than I ever did in an office. So it's looking at policies that enable to help women accommodate the various responsibilities they have. Because like it or not, as much as we say, there's maybe two in a relationship or it's not just the woman's responsibility, it is. It is. That's where it falls. We can argue it till the cows come home, but that's where it falls. So how can you have some flexible work arrangements? How can you look at age inclusive recruitment and promotion policies? There's no ageist languages. You're not putting things in like, dynamic or speedy, or there's certain words you use that you read it, you go, oh gosh, they want someone who's going to run at 50 miles an hour doing all the things. What about the output? What about the content? What about the quality? So make sure there's no age bias in what you're doing. Health and wellness support. It's really great to see. We just had World Menopause Day, and it's really great to see that conversation being brought to the forefront. People have just got over the menstruation. They accept pregnancy. Menopause is the next thing. It lasts with you much, much longer, even post-menopause. There are still symptoms. So what are your health and wellness policies looking like in your organization? Ergonomic chairs, seating, screens, all those things, training and development opportunities. Don't just single out the bright young things. What is your objective that you're trying to achieve within the organization? Where you can get that experience from? There's retirement planning, if at all possible. And I'm not just talking about financial retirement planning. Certainly where I am in Antigua, one of the things that happens here is that most organizations have the social security age here is for pension is 60. So most organizations take that as the retirement age. But what they do is say, okay, 60 finished. But if people have been working there for years, quite often they have no idea what to do next. So how can you help them transition if they're not going to stay in your organization? Though I think there's ways you can do that. That's another policy. How are you going to help them transition? How are you going to help retain that knowledge in your organization? So think outside of the financial rewards. Simply reward and recognize people of that demographic. I always tell people, just because I'm a certain age doesn't mean the fact that I reward and recognition is what motivated me to get to where I am has differed. I'm still a glory girl. I am still motivated by reward and recognition. And that goes throughout my career. So still include them in those processes.
The first thing that came to mind when you were talking, Janice, was the fact, again, of intersection points. One should not assume that when a woman is 50 years plus, she's living in the lap of luxuries, because the fact of the matter is, because women have the possibility to have children later in life, you could very well have a 50 plus year old woman who has children who are in elementary school and has children who were in university. And let us not forget, even though these kids are over 18 years old, they still need the support of their parents, right? Absolutely. And so just because they're over 18 doesn't mean that the work is done. And then, as you mentioned, having elderly parents that need care and supervision. And in some cases, as you and I both know, that can be really intense depending on the situation. If you're lucky, your parents stay fit and able to manage their lives on their own until the very end. But, on the other side of that, there could be an extraordinary amount of effort needed to manage even the most minute aspects of their life, not to mention doing that in parallel to working as well. Yeah. The other thing that you talked about, Janice, which I think is important, is about reimagining what work looks like in terms of the physical presence of people in the office. The other thing that I never thought of until you just mentioned it was this whole transition period and how that can be so valuable for an organization when they have people of a certain age who are off-ramping but still have so much meaning to an organization, as opposed to just like shaking your hand and saying, thank you very much, and, slamming the door behind you, right?
Absolutely. And when I mentioned mentoring before, but this is where also you can have mentoring both ways, not just the vintage helping the younger generation, but vice versa. So we help retain that knowledge in the organization. So we have to really think differently about recruitment and not be lazy about it and go for the shiny young things because that's the easiest way to get them. These people have opinions, have experience that are invaluable to organizations worldwide.
And if you think about this, Janice, probably one of the first times in history where you have so many generations working together, right?
Yeah.
So you have baby boomers, you have Generation X, you have millennials, you have Gen Zs working together. And going back to your word, if you don't take the lazy way out, and if you bring those teams together and you bring this brain power together, this could be extremely extraordinary in terms of what kinds of solutions the teams are able to drive, just because you have people coming from a different reference point. They have different lived experiences.
Yeah.
I would never want to minimize the experience of a 22-year-old because they see life through a different lens, where they have their whole life ahead of them, right? And so that's an important part of the conversation, but that's just as important as somebody who's, between 35 and 55 years old, who has something to
Absolutely.
add. Someone who's older than that. It never really occurred to me how an organization could really benefit from being thoughtful and intentional about designing intergenerational teams to solve problems and get things done. Well, you talked about getting to the end where people have to retire, and maybe there's a way that we can reimagine what that might look like. What roles do benefits and pension schemes play in retaining mature women in the workforce?
I think they're incredibly important because, again, as I alluded to earlier, try as we might, we cannot thwart the ravages of aging. There's things that are going to happen. Having those programs, having health screenings and educating, and not, but I've talked about menopause, not educating women on menopause, but men. Come on, 50% of the workforce, you're probably working next to a woman who's going through the process. You need to have an understanding. There's stress management, there's physical programs, mental health support, nutritional guidance. All those things can help. Guidance. I'm not a pension expert, but I'd like to know that I have enough to live comfortably, given what I want to do. It's not that we want to work 24/7. It may be that we can do less hours. We still give an opportunity for the younger to come through, but we want to do less. Because we don't have the dependencies we had anymore, but we still want to work. We still want to be connected. We still have lots to offer. So there's different ways of organizations looking at how they do their retirement planning, what that looks like. It doesn't have to be, you're this age out the door. It could be gradual. It could be less hours. It could be flexible working. It could be consulting. It could be having them as a mentor for people. There's so many different ways to reimagine how that looks.
Going back to the M word, menopause, because so there was a World Menopause Day last week or the week before last, I don't recall now. My sense is that people still recoil when this word is mentioned. It's really tough, and I can tell you that a friend of mine who works for a Fortune 50 company was asked, as the only woman in her business unit, to educate the others on World Menopause Day. And you could imagine that she respectfully declined. Do you have some words for organizations who decide that they want to take that sort of approach to getting woke about menopause and how to deal with that in educating people?
Well, first of all, one woman's experience is not the experience of all. It's the first thing to note. There are over 80 different symptoms of menopause. Some of us only get one or two if we're lucky. Some of us can have maybe a good 50% of them. So our experience is not reflective of every woman. What I would say to them is, if you're really serious about this, and you should be, is to get people in who are experts. But if you have more than one woman in your workforce, ask them what the challenges are they face as they're going through menopause. Be open about the conversation. There was a shocking statistic. I can't remember the statistic, that the sheer number of women who left their roles because of menopause, because they couldn't cope at work with their menopause symptoms. And these women are often at the peak of their careers. So how's that for a double whammy? You've fought all this time, slings and arrows, to get to where you are. And then when you get there, you get menopause and you can't function. So you feel too embarrassed and you leave. Organizations, you should be serious about this, especially if you want to retain, you should want to retain that sector of your workforce, because they're invaluable and they bring so much more than you imagine.
given the fact that your entire practice is focusing on women in the age group of 40 and above, already moving into the dimension where they're not considered the youngest one in the office anymore.
Yes.
What kinds of things can women do to more prepare themselves for the future of their careers, and particularly as everything is evolving? I mean, you see at breakneck speed, things are changing. Just with this announcement last year in November about platforms like ChatGPT and Bing, and how that's really changing the conversation that we're having about all types of work. What kind of advice do you give to women who are maturing to sort of stay ahead of the curve?
The first thing I would say is that you're responsible for your personal development, not your organization, not anybody else, you. And I certainly, for one, wouldn't want someone dictating my development. If there's something I want to do, I can take control of that. But there's always continuous learning. So make sure you're reskilling, upskilling, especially if you're in an industry that needs that. You're in the IT field, tech proficiency, you have to keep up to date with tech, what's happening, what's moving, what's shaking. Networking and mentoring, as I mentioned before, get out there. Join groups, meet people. If you don't want to get out there, connect with people on LinkedIn, ask questions, listen to podcasts, get the advice wherever you can. Be adaptable and flexible. So you cannot expect, with the world changing as quickly as it is, that the same way you've always done things is going to be right for where we're going through the next stage. So you need to accept that you need to be adaptable and you need to be flexible. You need to have that mindset that allows you to embrace change and be open to it. It's definitely an opportunity. Stay informed and proactive. We talked about that, just make sure you're in resilience and persistence. If they're still closing the door, keep on knocking. That's where you got to where you are. That's it. So keep on doing it, and definitely develop your soft skills. We'd probably need different skills as we mature. There are some things that worked well for us before, but our soft skills, communication, keeping those leadership skills. And I say adapt those soft skills because of multi-generational leadership. How we like to be managed isn't the way that generation likes to be managed now or led. So develop those soft skills. Be aware of how you need to communicate differently to those above and below you in generations. And as I said, career planning. Yes, career planning future, but I always want these women to think about, okay, if you didn't have this career, what else would you be doing? Start looking towards that as well. I personally think we've sometimes been sold a thing where, we've been told the glass ceiling is the be all and end all, but it's not. We need to be able to enjoy what happens after that glass ceiling breaks, as I said before. What do we do next?
I think it's such an important exercise to take an inventory of all of your skills. I think we forget how much we really know and how much we've done and how much we bring to the table. Without really having an inventory of where you are, it's really hard for you to reimagine where you could possibly go with it. And it's a tough exercise to do because, of course, the first thing that a client says to me is, well, where do I start? Going back to the question that you asked earlier, where do you see yourself? Where would you like to be? It's easy enough now with platforms like LinkedIn to pull up job descriptions to see what are they looking for. And you know what? You probably fulfill more than half of it, which means that that's a job that you're actually qualified for, because I think we all understand, we as women, we always want to fill 100% of the criteria.
And that's why I said at the top where I talked about we're starting from experience. We're not starting at the beginning, we're starting from experience. Exactly. And that's always the key thing to remember. Not saying there may be a couple of gaps you may want to fill in, but it's not to the point where you need to go and get another MBA. Where's your transferable skills? What have you learned? And you've been using them without realizing. They become second nature to you because you're so adept at using them.
You laid it out there, Janice. The other thing that I wanted to touch on that you mentioned was investment in yourself and continuing to learn. One thing that folks should not underestimate is that when you work for a lot of organizations, there is a budget even for you to be trained or to go to some sort of education. So not all of this has to come out of your pocket, but I mean, you have to be responsible to understand, or curious enough to understand, how can I get these things paid for? even when they are courses that don't require an investment, there's plenty out there. I've been using YouTube as like my second MBA to learn how to do so many things as it relates to technology, because like you said, that doesn't come second nature to me. I wasn't raised with a Game Boy in my hand like my child was. And so there's certain things where I have to be really intentional about how to use them and get the knowledge on how to use them. And so I find platforms like YouTube to be absolutely more value, certainly more value than I could get probably by enrolling in some programs. But the idea that we have to continue to invest in ourselves, and not when we're at the crossroads where we feel like, oh my God, my life is changing. Now I have to start taking courses. This should be something that is part of your gift to yourself every year, that you're learning something new. And not all of it has to relate to your career, right? I mean, you can just be doing things and learning things for the sake of learning them, because you never know when they might come in handy.
And just to add to that, when we talked about what next after leadership, so you could actually be doing this learning in parallel with your career, planning for the next stage. So you're not in the situation of what do I do next, but you've actually made that plan to focus and where do you go next.
Well, Janice, I'm not going to keep you too long, because I know that you have a very full roster of clients who are waiting for you. What I'd like for you to tell us is what's next for you.
I am digging deeper. I'm going into working with women over 50. That really is going to be my focus. What I realized, there's a gap talking about, I suppose, the maturing or the vintage leader, because there's always a lot of focus on the workforce as a whole. But actually, as a leader, there are additional skill sets you need to be a successful maturing leader. Still working with organizations, looking at how they maximize that maturing workforce. But as I said, my speciality will be the maturing leader. Keep on excelling in what you're doing.
And how can people find you?
That's very easy. They can find me by visiting my website, janicesutherland.com, or my happy place is LinkedIn. So you can connect me on LinkedIn at I am Janice Sutherland, or Instagram with the same name. Very simple. Follow the podcast This Woman Can. It's a podcast. On all
you have
platforms.
your weekly podcast. I will put all of your coordinates in the show notes so that people can find you. Janice, it's been a real pleasure. I certainly appreciate your insight and your expertise. I follow you on LinkedIn, and I look forward to continuing to follow you and see how this new area of your expertise develops and can add value to all women, but particularly women over 50 and women of color, because I think that we need attention, and we need people to show us some love as well. So I'm really happy that you're out there and that you're doing it. I look forward to seeing you online. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thanks for listening today. This is your time. Give yourself permission to reclaim what's important to you and be who you want to be. If you're getting value from this podcast, please subscribe, share it, or write a review. And connect with me on livingwhileleading.com or on LinkedIn. And don't forget to tune in next week.